We're entering the Garden of Gethsemane, and we just had an astute observation that there are a lot of olive trees in here. And here's the whole sanctuary of Gethsemane. I'll hang on you so don't fall. So I don't have to watch where I'm going.
Wait for me right here.
Oh, look at the trees.
Tell the priest, Father, can you come with me?
I'll go with you.
Yeah.
Okay, before we begin the Holy Scriptures, let's put ourselves in the presence of Christ. And no matter what part of the garden we are in, imagine you with him in the Garden of Gethsemane. Just finished the Last Supper, and the last thing that Jesus did was to wash the feet of all of his disciples. And then they sang some songs, and he came out alone to pray with three of his disciples, Peter, James, and John. Remember that Peter was the one, when Jesus approached him, to wash his feet, as is the custom of any host, to wash the feet of your guests before they sit down and eat. He would have washed the feet, but he was also the host, the guest of honor, and the meal, the Lamb of God. So Jesus washes the feet of all of his disciples. Then he comes to Peter, and Peter says, no, you're not going to wash my feet. And Peter was like a big show-off, basically, a loudmouth, someone I imitate a great deal. And his reaction was, you're not going to wash my feet. You know, I'm Peter, and I'm the head of the apostles. You told me I'm the rock and all that good stuff. And Jesus said, if you don't have your feet washed, then you're not going to share in my kingdom. Who knew what that meant at that point? So Peter, of course, being the outlandish character that he was, says, okay, not only my feet, then my head, my hands, wash all of me. And Jesus told him, at this point, you don't need all of you washed. Just your feet will be sufficient. He was making all of them worthy to be at that Last Supper, that Passover meal. The Passover meal, they sit, they break bread, they share the matzah, they recall the Exodus. That's what the whole purpose of the Passover is. The Seder is the order, and the order has been followed for centuries, the order of the meal. And they eat the bitter herbs, and they have the haroset, all the typical Jewish elements. But when it comes to the breaking of the bread, and this would be the fourth matzah, okay, it's at the end of the meal. That matzah usually was never eaten. It was reserved for Elijah. Remember back to Elijah? He would usher in the second coming. So what Jesus does is takes that bread that every apostle knows is reserved and not going to be eaten because it's reserved for Elijah, and he takes it. A lot of questions going on. I mean, they had questions about Jesus all the years they were following him, but now, at the end, they don't know it's the end, but he takes Elijah's bread. Who does he think he is? And he says, they had already eaten the lamb, probably. The lamb that was clean, cut, offered. Half it was offered to the sacrifice in the temple. Half it was on the table. They eat it. And as he breaks the bread, he says, basically, this is the bread of the new lamb. And he says, this is my body. Doesn't make sense. It will be given up for you. He doesn't say tomorrow, but he refers to it. And then at the last cup again, the reserved cup, never touched. This cup is the cup of the new covenant. So the new agreement, the new Messiah, the new coming of the kingdom. To their ears, it all made sense, not in reference to Jesus, but in reference to the new coming. Because as someone asked the other day, when did it all sink in? On Pentecost. So it's not all sinking in as they experience this meal of Jesus. So they take the cup, and he says, drink it, it's my blood, and it's the blood of the new covenant, the new agreement. Every time the lamb was cut and offered in the temple, that was a signing of the covenant, going back to the original time when Moses was in the desert and cut the sacrifice and got the blood of the animals and sprinkled it on the people, uniting them. Now we're not sprinkled with the blood of the wine of the covenant of Jesus. We take it into ourselves. And as we take it into ourselves, we become one with him. So they take the cup, and then they sing some psalms, and they go out to the garden. Matthew 26 continues the story. When Jesus had finished discussing all these things with his disciples, in 2 days it will be Passover, in which is time the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. So now we're going forward. Jesus reminds them, it's night right before. This is Spy Wednesday, we traditionally call it. One of the 12, the man named Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you?" They paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he began to look for an opportunity to betray Jesus. 30 pieces of silver was the price of a pair of sandals. That's what they betrayed him for. A lot of confusion on what Judas expected to accomplish. Was he in it for the money? Not so much. Could be. Not much. Was he in it for glory? That he would be the one who handed the false prophet over to the priests? Was he in it for faith? Because he could have believed that once Jesus is confronting the Pharisees and the Caiaphas and all the high priests, he'd reveal himself to them, and then they'd catch on and they'd know he is the Messiah. We don't know what was in Judas's mind, but whatever it was, he sold Jesus out by identifying him for the 30 pieces of silver. Eventually, as you know, that 30 pieces of silver was cast back into the temple. This is the Last Supper again. After singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "This very night you will be scandalized because of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised up, I shall go ahead of you in Galilee." Peter said, don't forget, loudmouth, "Even if the others will be scandalized because of you, I will never be." Jesus replies, "Amen, I say to you, this very night the cock crows 3 times, and you will have denied me 3 times. Peter said to him, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you." And all the disciples agreed and said the same thing. Soon we'll be coming to the area called Galicantu, which is the crowing of the cock, where Peter heard the rooster early in the morning. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, where we are now. He didn't hear trucks and planes overhead. He heard the quiet of the night, maybe the rustling of the olive trees. He said to them, "Sit here a while, and I'm going to go over there to pray." He took Peter, James, and John, Zebedee's sons, and began to suffer in anguish. As we're reading this, bring any of your own suffering, bring in any of your own anguish, the anguish of anyone in your family, the anguish of so many of our family members who are addicted to anything. Just bring all that anguish here to the Garden of Gethsemane. Then Jesus said to them, "My soul is sorrowful even to the point of death. Remain here a while and wait with me." Moving on a little further, he threw himself prostrate on the ground, praying, "Father, if it is possible, allow this cup to be taken from me. Let your will, not my will, be done." Returning to the disciples, he found them sleeping. He said to Peter, "Could you not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak." And for all those in our families and our country and the world who are addicted, we're in the midst in our country of an opioid crisis. Listen to those words. No matter how intent the person is, whether it's alcohol, money, gambling, drugs, listen to those words. The flesh is weak. Spirit is willing. I want to be healed. I want to stop. And then they pick up again. It's a long haul to sobriety. He left them there and went away to pray, but their eyes were heavy. He returned to the disciples and said to them again, "Are you still sleeping? Taking your rest? Behold, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us go. And then look, my betrayer is at hand." While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him there was a large crowd of people, armed with swords and clubs, priests and the elders of the people. And now the betrayer had agreed with them as a signal. He said, "The one I shall kiss is the man. Arrest him." Proceeding directly to Jesus, he said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said, "Friend, do what you are here to do." Then they came forward, seized Jesus, and placed him under arrest. And Jesus said, "You betrayed the Son of Man with a kiss." That might be one of the most painful experiences any of us has, to be betrayed by a friend, by a spouse, by a parent, by a child, to be betrayed. To have that person, turn his or her face away from you. But this, betrayed for a pair of sandals. Suddenly, one of those who were accompanying Jesus marched forward with his sword. He drew the sword, struck a servant of the high priest, slicing off his ear. And Jesus said, "Put the sword back into its place. Do you suppose that I cannot appeal to my Father in heaven for help? And he will immediately send more than 12 legions of angels? But then, how will the scriptures be fulfilled, that this must happen this way?" At that hour, Jesus said to the crowd, "Why are you coming with me with swords and clubs as a bandit? Day after day I sat with you in the temple, and you did not arrest me. But all this takes place so that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples fled. Let's put ourselves in that spot at that moment. Judas obviously betrayed him, but the rest betrayed out of fear and ran. Take the perspective of Jesus being left alone with all the mob, holding clubs, and watching the disciples run into the night. What would Jesus have experienced inside? Yes, he was the Son of God, but the whole mystery of our faith is that he became man. So he knew betrayal, he knew abandonment, he knew sadness, experiencing all that night. Those who had arrested Jesus led him away to Caiaphas and the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed at a distance up to the courtyard of the high priest. Then going inside, he sat with the attendants to see what the outcome would be. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin tried to elicit some false testimony against Jesus so they could put him to death. but they failed in their efforts. Even though many witnesses came forward with conjured stories and testimonies, finally 2 men came forward who stated, "This man said, I can destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." The high priest then rose up and said to him, "Have you no reply to this testimony these witnesses have given?" Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I command you to tell me before the living God whether you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus replied, "You've said it. But I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven." The high priest tore his vestments and screamed out, "He has blasphemed. What more do we need for further witnesses? Behold, you have just heard it. It's blasphemy. What do you think?" And they shouted, "He deserves to die." And they spat on him, slapped him with their fists and hands, taunted him, beat him, saying, "Prophesy to us, Christ. Who hit you?" Meanwhile, Peter was outside, sitting in the courtyard. One of the servant girls came over to him and said, "You too were one with him. You're a Galilean." And he denied it, saying, "I don't know who you're talking about." He walked out of the entrance gate. Another servant girl caught sight of him and said to the people, "This man was with Jesus." And again, Peter denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." Shortly afterwards, some bystanders came to Peter and they said, "You unquestionably are one of them. Even your accent betrays you." Then Peter swore and cursed and said, "I do not know the man." At that very moment, the cock crowed. Peter remembered, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly.